You do not struggle with having no close friends. You struggle with being emotionally unreadable. That difference matters, because loneliness is not always about absence. Sometimes it is about invisibility, and invisibility is often self-constructed. You tell yourself you have just not met the right people, that others are shallow, that modern friendships are transactional. But what you rarely examine is the subtle distance you maintain in every interaction, the half-step back, the controlled tone, the carefully curated disclosures. You do not push people away dramatically, you simply never let them close enough to stay. This is not random, it is nervous system regulation. When closeness begins to form, your threat detection circuitry activates. Intimacy is processed not only as connection, but as potential exposure. Attachment conditioning from early relational experiences wires your reward system to associate independence with safety. Dependence feels destabilizing, so your system defaults to autonomy. It feels mature, it feels strong, it is actually protective. Research on attachment patterns shows that avoidant relational styles often mistake emotional self-containment for self-sufficiency. The brain encodes vulnerability as risk when early bonding included inconsistency, criticism, or emotional unpredictability. Over time, identity preservation becomes more important than connection. You learn to regulate alone, you learn not to need, and you call that strength. Here's the part most people misunderstand. You are not incapable of closeness. You are hyper-attuned to the cost of it. You scan for subtle rejection, micro-shifts in tone, delays in response, slight changes in energy. Your cognitive bias leans toward confirmation of emotional threat. If someone pulls back slightly, your system registers it as proof that you should not have leaned in. This is where it gets interesting. The same intelligence that protects you from disappointment is the mechanism that prevents depth. You do not lack social skill, you lack sustained exposure to mutual vulnerability. You can be charismatic, you can be funny, you can even be warm, but you rarely reveal the unedited version of yourself, and people connect to what is revealed, not what is performed. Think of it like a house with tinted windows. From the inside, you can see everything clearly. From the outside, people see only reflection. They might admire the exterior, they might even knock, but if the glass never becomes transparent, no one truly enters. Over time, you begin to believe no one wants to come inside. In reality, they simply cannot see a doorway. At some point, this pattern becomes identity. You tell yourself you are just selective, that you value depth, that you have high standards, and perhaps you do, but sometimes standards are sophisticated defense mechanisms. They protect you from choosing someone who might actually see you. There is also a subtle reward loop involved. Solitude gives you control. Control reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is metabolized by the brain as stress. When you are alone, there is no social ambiguity, no mixed signals, no emotional negotiations. Your nervous system relaxes because variables are minimized. But long-term, this creates a paradox. You feel safer alone and emptier over time. Around this point, most people expect reassurance that you just need to put yourself out there, that your people will appear. But that advice bypasses the real friction. The real friction is tolerating exposure without retreating. Here's the uncomfortable layer. If you have no close friends, there's a possibility that part of you prefers it that way, not consciously, but functionally. Closeness would require being known. Being known would require imperfection, and imperfection risks rejection. So you maintain a version of yourself that is polished enough to avoid criticism, but distant enough to avoid intimacy. The hidden cost is subtle, but cumulative. You begin to experience life as an observer. You share experiences, but rarely your internal processing of them. You celebrate achievements, but without someone who understands the struggle behind them. Over time, loneliness shifts from situational to structural. It becomes the architecture of your life. 70% of the pain is not from being alone, it is from not being witnessed. And here's the deeper truth. The pattern that once protected you may now be isolating you from the very thing you evolved for. Humans are wired for co-regulation. Our nervous systems stabilize in the presence of safe others. When you deny that consistently, you increase baseline stress without realizing it. You become more self-reliant and more internally burdened at the same time. This does not mean you are broken. It means your system adapted intelligently to earlier conditions, but adaptation can outlive its usefulness. What kept you safe at 12 may keep you isolated at 25 or 35. The shift begins with something small but destabilizing, allowing someone to see uncertainty. Not trauma dumping, not forced vulnerability, just one unpolished thought, one honest admission that you don't always have it handled. When your system urges you to retract it, notice that impulse. That's the old circuitry firing. You do not build closeness through intensity, you build it through repetition of safe exposure, consistent transparency in manageable doses, letting someone respond to the real version of you, not the edited one. Some people will not know what to do with that. That's data, not rejection. The goal is not to accumulate friends, it is to dismantle the mechanism that keeps you unseen. If you recognize yourself in this, do not treat it as a flaw, treat it as awareness. Awareness is the first interruption in an automatic pattern. You are not incapable of closeness, you are hyper-attuned to the cost of it. You scan for subtle rejection, micro-shifts in tone, delays in response, slight changes in energy. Your cognitive bias leans toward confirmation of emotional threat. If someone pulls back slightly, your system registers it as proof that you should not have leaned in. This is where it gets interesting.